Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to give everyone a minute to join. In the meantime, I'll just let you all know that closed captions for today's event are available, whether you're joining via Facebook or YouTube. And the event is also going to be recorded, so it'll be available on YouTube and Facebook afterwards. All right, I'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm the Campaigns Associate for Food Empowerment Project. I'm going to provide a visual description of myself. I am a white person with long brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and a white and blue floral shirt. And I'm sitting in front of a white wall in my home. I'm joining from the occupied land of the Duwamish and Coast Salish peoples known as Seattle. Thank you so much for joining us today. This event is being streamed live on YouTube and Facebook, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So please ask any questions that you have by commenting on the live stream on Facebook or on YouTube. We're looking forward to receiving your questions then. So for those of you who don't know, Food Empowerment Project, also known as F.E.P, is a vegan food justice organization. And we work in 4 core areas, which include promoting ethical veganism for the animals, advocating for the rights of farm workers, working with community members to survey access to healthy foods in Black and Brown communities, and informing consumers about the worst forms of child labor, including slavery in the chocolate industry. So one of the issues that we work on as an organization involves our Fight for the Ocean effort. In 2018, F.E.P declared Dr. Sylvia Earle's birthday, which is August 30th, as Fight for the Ocean Day to honor this incredible oceanographer. And this year we're hosting a week-long virtual event leading up to Fight for the Ocean Day. So that's going to be from August 23rd to August 30th, and it's going to be featuring cooking demos, speakers, giveaways, and more. So we hope that you'll join us for that event. And Fight for the Ocean Day is not just a day or a week, but is also a year-round effort to highlight sea creatures and to encourage people to see the negative impacts of eating them and to stop eating them. We also encourage people to see other ways that we can do more to help the ocean, such as reducing the use of plastics, doing ocean cleanups, waterway cleanups, and more. So we are so excited to welcome Dr. Jen Telesca, the author of Red Gold, the Managed Extinction of the Giant Bluefin Tuna, which goes behind the scenes of ocean governance to show the conditions that are leading to the loss of one of the planet's last big fish, which is the giant bluefin tuna. Dr. Telesca is the Assistant Professor of Environmental Justice in the Department of Social Sciences and Cultural Studies at Pratt Institute. Her op-eds have appeared in Hakai Magazine and Yale E360.org, and her work has been featured in Earth Island Journal, Manga Bay, and Psychology Today. She is trained in anthropology, law, and media studies, and does fieldwork at the United Nations and in treaty bodies, diplomatic missions, and other sites. Dr. Telesca, Jen, I'm going to bring you on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
So I guess maybe should I go ahead and briefly introduce you all to myself. I'm super excited actually to learn about the work of the organization and certainly to share with you some things that I learned through the book, but also in sharing what Amanda also did, I'd like to visually introduce myself too. You can call me Jen. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. Identify as a white person, brown hair, tied up in a bun. It's actually quite warm here in New York today. I'm wearing glasses with an orange shirt, sitting at my desk. I'm not sure you might be able to see the succulent plant over my shoulder at the window. And I'm joining you all today from the lands once occupied and now dispossessed from the Canarsie, Munsee-speaking Lenape peoples. This site is known as Brooklyn, New York.
Awesome. Thank you so much for introducing yourself, Jen. We'll go ahead and get started with our first question. So, as an organization that encourages people not to eat sea creatures, and to understand the dire situation in the ocean. We here at F.E.P. are really excited when we see books such as yours. So we're wondering what inspired you to write a whole book about the giant bluefin tuna?
So the book took the better part, both the research and the writing phase, about 10 years to complete. And really the driving motivation for me has always been that I identify with the ocean as home. No matter where I go in the world, if I go to the sea, I find myself at home by the sea. And I know Montauk and Shinnecock Inlets on Eastern Long Island in New York State best. As a child, I would walk the docks there in summer with my family, and I would see these remarkable creatures. So the sleek swordfish, these, with the long sworded nose, the mako sharks that to the touch felt like sandpaper, and these giant bluefin. And so that was in the 1970s. And just over the years, I've just seen the marine environment degrade before my eyes in my lifetime. And really, the whole book project was an effort to understand what officials in positions of power were doing or were not doing in order to care for my home.
It's very powerful. Thank you. And wow, 10 years of research. That's amazing. Of everything that you've learned about the bluefin tuna fishes over the years, what are some of the most amazing facts that you could share with us?
So there are lots of them. These really, they're extraordinary creatures, like all creatures are, if only people took the time to get to know them. So just to give you a sense of the bluefin, so these are one of the fastest fish at sea. The only fish that is faster than the bluefin is the sailfish. So they quite literally accelerate faster than a Porsche. They cruise the ocean with mates capable of weighing well over a ton. So, it's kind of like imagine a stampeding pack of horses underwater. And that's pretty much what it's like to imagine the bluefin. These are also, I think it's important to recognize that these are actually warm-blooded animals. They're somewhere on the evolutionary scale between a cold-blooded cod and a seafaring dolphin or whale. And it's really it's her warm blood that enables her to elevate her internal temperature higher than surrounding water. So she can then dive to depths that are, where the water starts to become black and icy cold. And yet she can also just quite literally shoot across the ocean. I mean, the entire Atlantic Ocean in less than 40 days from the shores of the US and Canadian Maritimes in order to enter that tiny 8-mile stretch of the Strait of Gibraltar to enter the Mediterranean Sea. So this is the Atlantic variety of bluefin. I should also say too, just to clarify for the audience, that my book focuses on the Atlantic bluefin, but there are also bluefin found in the northern and southern hemispheres in the Pacific Ocean as well. And, I think it's important for people to recognize, oftentimes when I meet people, either, just casually or with students or just the general public, there's the sense that people understand that this is a threatened animal, but also that this is an animal that's the most expensive sushi money can buy. Right? So people may have seen the news story several years ago. This was in 2019, where there was a record catch of a bluefin from the Pacific that sold at auction for $3.1 million US.
Wow. That is amazing. And sorry, there was some technical error and I didn't know if it was on my side or your side, like
okay.
for everybody.
Yeah, I think I need to repeat. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Please, if anyone in the audience, if there's any errors, then do let us know. So just in case it's on my end. But thank you. I am curious what it is like on your own path from growing up and loving the ocean so much that drew you specifically to the giant bluefin tuna, the Atlantic bluefin tuna? Yeah.
Yeah, so some of it was because the creature was familiar to me, having grown up by the sea on Eastern Long Island, but also at the time when I was figuring out what my dissertation topic was going to be, I remember there was this moment, this was in 2009 during the Copenhagen climate change talks, and which were widely seen as a failure. There was no agreement that emerged from them. And I remember feeling during the press coverage and even of what was going on inside those meetings, I was just like, so where is the ocean? You know, so there was all this talk about the rainforests but there was just nothing. I mean, this has somewhat changed since then, but the talk of what was going on at sea was really minimal. And at the time in 2009, this was really the moment when the second bluefin tuna campaign by the transnational marine advocacy groups really started to take off. And I basically rode that wave to try to understand what was going on.
Wow. That's fascinating. Thank you. And can you tell us more a little bit about what it is, who it is that is threatening the giant bluefin tuna?
So I think it's important to understand, in some ways, the simple answer is us, people, not all people, a pretty narrow slice of people, that is those who are catching bluefin, managing bluefin, eating bluefin as sushi. These are the relatively privileged of the world. So that's really to say that the threats to the bluefin stem from human activity. So we know the climate crisis is felt at sea. Right, so we know, for example, that the carbon released into the atmosphere is received at sea as ocean acidification. There are some scientists that suggest that ocean acidification might affect their migratory patterns, their spawning habits. We don't really know. We do know for sure that the coal burning power plants emit what then becomes mercury in larger sea creatures that we then eat. So that poison, when people ingest the bluefin that has a high mercury content, is known as Minamata disease. This is a nervous disorder, that became quite famous actually in the early 1970s. And then there's warming water temperatures, which are effectively sending bluefin closer to the poles, away from the equator. And so these are all tremendous threats, right? And these are the ones that are well known. And really what the book tries to do is to show that the other threat to the bluefin is fisheries management, right? So we might think that fisheries management is there to protect the animal, but what I found after years of research is that this is not at all the case. And so really what the book does is effectively do a deep dive into the world's most powerful fisheries management organization, which is known as the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. It's known by the acronym of ICAT, or ICCAT. So in general, ICAT manages the catch of tunas, and when seabirds or turtles and sharks, swordfish are also caught in international waters. So this is an organization established by treaty over a century ago in 1969. And what I found was that, again, to directly answer your question, the threat of fisheries management is that the member states are there not to conserve the animal, they're there to conserve the export markets of the nation states that have signed up to the treaty. And in many ways, rather than see the institution as inept or inefficient, what I found is that the institution is actually quite good at doing the job that's been asked of it by international law, which is to fish as hard as possible in order to grow national economies. And this has been the international law of the sea in place since 1958. And so really, part of what I try to do then is to understand how human-centric, how speciesist really the international law of the sea is, in light of the plight of the bluefin, right? So it's in many ways an effort then to understand that these institutions should not be directed to conserve prestige goods for effectively wealthy elites that can afford to even buy the world's most expensive tuna fish, but rather to point out that we need to redirect our relationship with the sea, including the way in which the law and institutions themselves are structured.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think this kind of leads in well to our next question, which is, so part of F.E.P's Fight for the Ocean effort, as I said, is that we highlight the impact of eating sea creatures on our ocean. We encourage people to stop eating them in order to fight for the ocean. So what has all of your research and all that you talked about taught you about how we need to fight for the ocean?
Yeah, I have to say, I really appreciate the way you phrased the question. Right, so you phrased the question, what do we need to do to fight for the ocean, right? So, which is different than what we typically get, which is, what do we need to do to save the ocean? And part of what I've learned through the project is the recognition that this language of saving the ocean, or saving the bluefin, or saving the whale or the vaquita, is deeply problematic. And there's a whole chapter in the book that talks about this, but in any case, I think the point is that for me, a more productive frame is to think about not how we might save the animal, but how we might move to a place where we respect and revere and honor the animal as a precondition to ever save, right, this creature. And I guess really, just to share with you and the audience is, it's the sense that, these are not merely animals that are machines, right, that are available and ready-made for human consumption. These aren't animals who merely, eat, mate, defecate, and die, right? That these are not fish stocks for sale, like on Wall Street, nor are they just like, again, passively awaiting our consumption, but rather to see them, to kind of imagine a world where fish become co-creators in this life, where they have social lives, they have, they are not only in the world, they are aware of the world, right? And for me, it's the inability or the unwillingness culturally to venerate our fellow beings that lies at the root of our ecological crisis. And for me, I think an institution like ICAT would transform tremendously if decision makers took on that worldview in order to implement the meaningful structural change that's needed.
Thank you. Yeah, I really love the way also that you you talk about bluefin tunas, and also criticizing the language of saving them and everything. So that's, again, why we were really excited about your book.
Well, and I guess maybe if I could just add, so part of what I realized, and, again, maybe to kind of shed a little bit more light on this, I realized that, this language of saving the animal relies very much on a colonialist, missionary, white-centered, privileged worldview that was often deployed during the colonial encounter, um, and other very disturbing trajectories in human history. And so the last thing I would want would be then to repeat the same kind of logic, even if the intention is meaningful. I think in many ways there's a more more related way, I think, of imagining how people themselves are connected to the world around them, right? That that people are not the great supreme being on the planet, but rather we're just part of a planet, and our role is to be stewards that care for the planet and all of its beings.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Also, so in a previous discussion that you and I had, you'd mentioned that you don't eat fishes, and I'm wondering what motivated you to stop eating fishes.
So I haven't eaten fish in a long time, and certainly with this project, it really became very clear to me. And I guess there's this sense in which, for me, working at a university, every semester I always get a student or two that declares him or herself a pescatarian, and I always have to push back a little bit, and I push back in large part because there's the sense that people might know that it's okay to eat animals, that it's not okay to eat animals on a factory farm on land, right? On land, right? But then why is it okay for them to eat fish? Or, further thinking through, why is the flesh of fish not also considered meat? Right? So there are cultural reasons for that. But I guess really, to share with you that the two main ways in which people get fish these days is through aqua farms or aquaculture, and through wild capture fisheries. And both are deeply problematic. And the world fish supply is it's about split in half. So about half of the world's seafood now comes from aqua farms. And these are very disturbing places. I was in Norway 2 summers ago, and I was there delivering some lectures on ocean governance and the Sustainable Development Goal number 14. And while I was there was an organized tour of a salmon farm, and wow, and so we know certain things. I mean, it was very disturbing. And part of what was very disturbing was not only the affect of the person giving the tour and the justification for why farming salmon was okay, but I also learned on this tour that at least at this particular farm, you had a carnivorous fish fed a diet of 70% genetically modified soy. Right? Salmon do not eat soy or soy products, right? These are creatures that are inoculated with antibiotics. They live in very packed cages. Some are genetically modified. We know that about half of farm salmon are deaf. They can no longer hear. And so, so for me, especially the aquaculture piece is deeply fraught. And then, the obvious part of eating wild fish is equally as fraught if we recognize how overfished the sea has become of wild sea creatures. And I think the important point to recognize here is that there's a tendency to think that that the problem here is that the numbers have been driven down. And that's important for sure. But I think equally as important is the recognition that it's not just the number, but it's the size of the animal that has also decreased. right? So so there's this sense in which, and so this is why, you know, for me in that opening prologue, it's homage to a former ocean giant, right? It's and so part of what happens is that fish aren't people, right? They that the older and more mature a fish is, the more that fish contributes to future generations. And so what happens when you remove the larger, older fish, you're effectively creating an ocean of teenagers. Right? And so that in itself is also problematic, right? So in many ways, the whole seafood sector, I mean, is deeply, is deeply problematic, both ethically and politically.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's so powerful about there being an ocean full of teenagers and not having their elders to look to.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas? And I know this. I was thinking about phrasing this question. I was also like, I don't want to be using the language of to save the bluefin tuna fishes, but people who want to make an impact to help the bluefin tuna fishes, do you have any suggestions for what people can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially for the audience that's likely joining us, I think, you know, there's a recognition that, you know, veganism or vegetarianism, you know, is the floor, right? It's not the ceiling. And I think it's really important for people to not buy into the popular discourse that encourages us to see ourselves as consumers first and citizens second. And I'd like to see ourselves, think of ourselves as citizens first, making demands on our government, especially in representative democracies. And one of the reasons why I think it's really important for people to see themselves as citizens is that really, in order to implement meaningful, lasting change, we need to be able to leverage and scale the power of government, which is a much more powerful tool than an individual person making choices as a consumer, freely operating in a world of markets, right? So, so I think it really is important for people to reclaim their citizenship by making demands on their government, right? And I saw this all the time when I was at ICAT meetings, which is to say, you know, the U.S. delegation sends about 40 people to an ICAT meeting, which tends to be anywhere between 10 days to 2 weeks. And that's all funded by taxpayer dollar. You know, I think the other thing too, and really this is a shout out to F.E.P, which is that there's this, you know, and actually I just shared with you, Amanda, earlier, I just published today in honor of World Oceans Day, a piece on ocean justice. And I really do hope that the movement for ocean justice, for food justice, for climate justice become coalitions that work together and learn from each other and join forces. And I think what the ocean justice movement might be able to do is just to challenge the land-based and human-centric presumptions that are brought to light by SeaWorlds. And really, you know, I hope that when people as citizens come together to care for our planetary home for future generations, that we'll put environmental justice at the core of our mission.
I absolutely agree. Thank you. And yeah, I read your blog and it was really great to read. Also, I love how we talk at F.E.P here a lot about how it's both your individual choices and also your collective voices that are making an impact. So thank you for highlighting how that connects to this issue. That is all that I have for my questions today. So thank you so much for all of your answers. And I'm going to open it up to the audience who's watching to see if you have any questions. You can again, put them in either on Facebook or YouTube as comments, and we'll pull them up. These, again, are questions for Jen. So yeah. And in the meantime, let me also, while we give people a chance to think of things, I'll pull up an image of Jen's book and also a discount code in case anyone is interested in buying through the website that it's published through. It's University of Minnesota Press. So I'm just going to pull that up. There we go. Sorry, I just realized that the audio was not off with that. So there's the banner again for anybody who wants to read it. It's a great book. From what I've read so far, I've really, really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Well, and if I could just like briefly, maybe while people are gathering questions, just to share a little bit about the cover. So, you know, in developing the book, the publisher asked for ideas, and I was insistent that it not be the usual image of a predator-prey relationship, you know, that reduces the animal to mere machine on a dock, dead somewhere, you know, floating in the breeze. And so the publisher came up with that image, and it's really, it's an extraordinary image. It's actually a detail of a painting by the artist Stanley Meltzoff. And I think what's really important to note about that cover is that there's a stripe on her face that's yellow. That's actually part of the image that Meltzoff developed. I mean, this was decades ago. And you see the bluefin schooling and the other fish in the background fading like phantoms. But I think the really powerful part of the cover is the when you see that the bluefin naturally doesn't have that yellow stripe across her face. But what's super interesting is if we explode the frame and include the viewer looking onto the image, it's that gold stripe that the viewer is reflecting onto the animal. That becomes actually, you know, the sense in which we then must take marginalized life seriously, but, you know, also consider the way in which that projection of red gold is not natural to the animal. It's actually representative of the projection of, you know, a commoditized value that's ascendant in the dominant society around us.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I had no idea about that, the detail, and it's really great to know that. We do have a few questions, so I'm just going to bring them up. Here's one. Shadanya asks, thank you so much for trying to help break down how fishes are seen as numbers versus individuals who feel pain. When writing your book, did you find anyone within ICAT who understood how you view things?
Yeah, no, thank you for answering, for asking that question. It's a really important question, because the last thing I would want is for people to walk away thinking that the 500 delegates that go every year to an ICAT meeting are mere automatons that, you know, think the same way, and they don't. And so many of them are there in their official capacities, and so have to represent the views of their government. And so even though publicly they might have to adopt the views of the government and, you know, be worried about matters of global trade, in private, they were very well aware that these are extraordinary creatures. And certainly some, not all, but some of the environmental advocates were also well aware of it. So it's not to say that that all participants think this way. It's just that the institution effectively over more than a half century now has created the conditions for the giants to die off, and that's the managed extinction part of the subtitle. But I think it's a really important question, because again, the last thing I would want is for people to walk away thinking that this is a monolith. There are actually people that are trying to do really good work and do the reform inside the institution. But it's really like changing the direction of the Titanic as it's about to hit the iceberg. It's very difficult to do.
Thank you for that metaphor. Wow. It is great to know that there are people that are within it that are trying to make the change at the same time.
And they're constrained, right? They're constrained in many ways, both by the demands of the nation state, by the aspirations for empire. They're constrained by international law that, again, is very speciesist. I mean, if you read the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea from 1958, fish are products that are, quote, meant for human consumption.
Wow. That is a lot. Wow, well, thank you. And thank you, Shidani, for your question. I'm going to pull up the next one. Let's see. This is from Megan. Did anyone from ICAT have a response to your book?
So far, no one from the field has reached out to me since the book has been out. I've been in contact with some people, but I haven't. I mean, I have gotten pushback from fisheries scientists based on earlier pieces that I've published, but nothing specific about the book.
Wow. Another question about the book. Have there been any developments since the book was published?
So I think, so, I mean, I'm assuming, so with developments with the bluefin, so I think actually this is part of what this question provokes in me, is to share with the audience that part of what I learned in writing the book was, so the lowest quota for bluefin the bluefin quota is split for bluefin in the East Atlantic and bluefin in the West Atlantic. And the lowest quota ever for the bluefin was in 2010. And then they slightly adjusted the quota a little bit higher in 2012. And again, this was this moment when news outlets such as the New York Times effectively declared the bluefin saved and stopped covering the story. And fast forward to 2017, when the quota allocation was up for renegotiation again. And once the marine advocates and those who covered them took their foot off the gas, and ICAT was no longer in the news, the institution has now tripled the quota, to the point where the quota for the bluefin in the East is at its highest level ever.
Wow, and all in the face of their extinction. It's so sad.
So it's, effectively became then business as usual.
Yeah.
Right, which is why you do need advocates in the public sphere putting demands on these institutions. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that gets again to what people can do, to make an impact with their collective voices. We have a question from Alyssa Clement. Wow, thank you so much for your care and hard work for attaining justice. Where can I read the Ocean Justice blog you published today?
It's it's in a journal called Environment and Society, and So actually, the whole journal this year has a special issue on oceans. And if you can't find it directly, if you go to, I posted it to, I'm not a big, so Amanda knows I'm not a big social media person. So I go on every once in a while, and I went on today to post this piece. So if anyone would like to see that, I posted it to my Twitter handle, and it's called Ocean Justice. And really, I think what the blog also tries to do is pick up on a point raised by environmental justice scholars to recognize that the disempowerment that marginalized peoples feel in Black, Brown, Indigenous communities shares an affinity with, right, so these are, in many ways, when a person is called an animal, right, this shares an affinity with the way in which marginalized life in non-human worlds is also treated. And so part of what the blog tries to do is just to point out how we might imagine an environmental justice for the sea beyond just the marine conservation movements that tend to not take marginalized life all that seriously.
Thank you. I'm going to pull up the next question. This is from Bren. Who are the major bluefin tuna fishing countries, and who are the major consuming countries?
It's a really great question. These are all great questions. So, and what's actually, I'm really glad that this question asked not just at the level of consumption, but at the level of supply. So, so oftentimes in the field, I would hear people, when I would talk about the project, people would say, "Oh, it's the Japanese. The Japanese, they eat so much seafood," and it's a very Orientalist frame in large measure, because it's not. So even though, yes, the Japanese do import a lot of bluefin, the imports of bluefin have actually been declining over the years. And so, and actually, I think it's also really important to note that the multinational Mitsubishi is said to control about 40% of the bluefin tuna trade. So in addition to consumption, the really important point that this question raises is who is supplying, meaning who is profiting off of the sale of these fish. And here you get the usual players from the global north. So one of the things that I learned very early on in the field, someone said to me, what the EU is to fisheries, the US is to oil and gas. Mm-hmm. Meaning that the US economy is very tied to the oil and gas industry, which explains in large part why it's so difficult to reform. And the European Union also has economies that are very tied to the fishing sector. So the largest exporter of bluefin is Spain in the Atlantic. And then we have other countries in the European Union, including France and Italy, and to a lesser degree, Portugal. And then we have the US, Canada, and Japan. So these are all North Atlantic states that, all effectively former empires or deeply tied to former empires or present day empires. So it's a really important question, I think, to point out that we need to imagine not just who's consuming the fish, but who's profiting from the fish at the level of supply.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for drawing our attention to that. That's so important. And the face of what everybody hears most. I think that is all that we have for questions today. So thank you so much again, Dr. Telesca, Jen, for coming on. I really appreciate your time and for sharing everything that you did with us.
Yeah, of course. If I might, Amanda, there's one thing that I would like to add, which is, because I think there's this point, just to kind of get at the earlier question about, what is it that we can do? And so, yes, think of ourselves as consumers, and certainly think of ourselves as citizens. But I think there's also important. It's also important for us to imagine the language that we use to describe the animal. And so you may have noticed that I use the pronoun she in speaking about the bluefin in the singular. And although I feel solidarity with my trans kin, without a doubt, I learned through the project that something as seemingly simple as a pronoun was actually really difficult for me to adopt. I literally had to rewire my brain in order to learn how to express how I was relating to the animal through language. So I would encourage your audience to also think about how they might adopt language that's more in step with their advocacy, so that it's not resources. It's not right, that we're moving away from this kind of language that tends to objectify and treat the animal as if it's an it, right, or a resource. Right? These are, it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, language is definitely at the heart of everything. I would agree with that. All right. Well, thank you. If there's anything else that you want to share, please do. If not, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the audience that was able to come. It's always a pleasure to share, and certainly to join forces with your organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen.
Of course.
All right, so that is all that we have for today. Thank you again to everybody who attended, and a reminder that this event will be recorded, so it'll be available on YouTube and Facebook. And also, we hope that you will join us for our Fight for the Ocean Week events, which are from August 23rd to August 30th. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great rest of your World Ocean Day.